Wire wrap loops are an integral part of jewellery making, but so many people struggle to get them right. So today I'm sharing my 10 best tips for making them, as well as what to do when they go wrong. Hello and welcome to The Stylish Maker. My name's Carol. Today I'm going to walk you through some tips and tricks for getting the best wire wrapped loops and how to troubleshoot the ones that aren't so great. Like lots of people, I used to really struggle with wire wrap loops, and it took me ages to figure out how to get them looking nice. Mine used to be really messy, and while there's nothing wrong with a messy wrap in the right circumstances, sometimes you want a nice, neat one. Before I start, if you are struggling with standard loops, I'll leave you a video linked below that covers how to make the perfect loop every time. What is a wire wrap loop? A wire wrap loop is a loop that has a longer tail wrapped around the stem of the wire. That's the bit coming out of your beads, or that you will thread your beads onto. So I've got two in my hand here. This one is a wire wrapped loop and this one is a standard loop. And you'll notice that the wire wrapped loop, basically it has a couple of pieces of wire wrapped around the stem, which is this bit that your beads will go onto. Now, why would you use a wire wrapped loop versus a standard loop? There are some really great reasons to use a wire wrap loop over a standard loop. Number one is if you have beads with really small holes, you can use a thinner wire and still have a sturdy piece of work. Number two, wire wrap loops can add an extra design element that can take your work to the next level. Number three, they are more secure than a standard loop, but you don't want to use them every time. You'll get to know when it's best to use them or not. Number four, wire wrap loops work well to hold your beads snugly on the wire and close any gaps. And number five, it's also useful to use a wire wrap loop when you need a larger loop but you are using a thinner wire. You can test if a standard loop is strong enough by pulling it apart. So I've got a couple of components here, and these are made with standard loops. And you can see the loops there and they're connected. So what I'm going to do is give it a good tug and see if this wire is strong enough for a standard loop. So this is a 24 gauge wire, and I can tell you now what will happen when I pull it is the loops will pull apart. And you can see there my loop just broke. Well, it came undone. So clearly this is a situation where a wire wrap loop would have worked better. Now, wire matters with wire wrap loops. Choosing the right wire is one of the most important parts of creating perfect wire wrap loops, or any loop. If you try to create loops with standard craft wire, you just won't get a good result. You need to choose a half hard wire made for jewellery making. This is also called German style wire. As you know, I generally use a 20 gauge half hard wire for making standard loops. I try not to make wire wrap loops with a 20 gauge wire simply because it's too thick to look nice. When I was learning, I did a course on wire wrap loops, and the instructor suggested a 26 gauge half hard wire. I tried this for a while, but I think that's why I was getting messy loops all the time. It's easy to use, but I find 26 gauge quite hard to control. Now, this is the brand of wire I like to use. It's a beadsmith wire. Now, if you want to have a look on Amazon, you will find that Beadsmith has a large selection of half hard wire, and I'll leave you a link to their store down below. So tip number one is to use a 24 gauge half hard wire. It's just got a bit more weight to it, and it's much easier to get in the right place. Tools. Now let's talk about your pliers. You will need a pair of round nose pliers and a pair of chain nose pliers to make your wire wrap loops. If you are having trouble holding your wire firmly, you may also want to use another pair of chain nose pliers, or a pair of nylon jawed pliers can be useful as well. I also like to use my Xeron crimping pliers to tuck in the ends, and I'll show you that a bit later. I recommend that you pop a mark on both your round nose pliers, and you can see I've done it here, and your chain nose pliers. What I mean by that is a mark with a permanent marker on your pliers so that all your loops are the same size. So I have here a permanent marker. It is a Sharpie and it is an ultra fine point. Now you can use any permanent marker, that's fine. And by the way, if you do mark your pliers and it's in the wrong place, you can generally remove it with a little bit of alcohol. So what I do is I take my pliers, switch hands, and I make a mark with my pen about where I want my loops to be. So if I line my wire up every single time with that mark, my loops will always be the same size. Let me demo for you. If I put my wire into my plier exactly where that mark is and I wrap my wire around, you will find that all of your loops are the same size. So that's a handy tip. Now, I did say to mark your chain nose pliers as well, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go through into the troubleshooting phase. Now let's make our first wire wrapped loop. So I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and I'm going to make a bend in my wire. And I'm actually just going to make it all the way down here, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that soon. Now I'm going to take my round nose pliers and I'm going to pop them into that bend there. And you can see that I've lined up my wire with the mark on my pliers. Now I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to push my wire around and bring it down the other side of the pliers like that. Now I'm going to twist my hand. Okay, so I had my hand like this, now I'm twisting around and I'm going to pull that wire across and towards me. And let's just take that out. Now I like to refer to this as the lady with the scarf stage. You've got her body coming up, you've got her head sitting on the top, and her scarf is this bit blowing in the wind. And the scarf is the bit that we're going to wrap around. Now, just before we wrap it, I want to mention that when you've got your pliers in, I'll just pop mine back in there, make sure you pull this wire quite firmly around the pliers, and that will give you a nice round loop. It'll also make your loops more consistent in size. Now I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and I'm going to pop them on there just at the place where the wire crosses. And then I'm going to take my wire with my left hand and I'm going to wrap it around once. So that's my first wrap, twice, it's my second wrap, and 3 times. Now what you're looking for at this stage is to have your wraps sitting one nicely on top of the other. Now that doesn't always happen, but it is much easier to do with a 24 gauge wire. And I will talk to you a little bit more about what happens later if they don't sit nicely one on top of the other. Now I've got it like this. I'm actually going to go a little bit further because I want to take my wrap to the back. And you can see there's my wire coming out the back. I'm going to take my flush cutters using the flush side and I'm going to come down, and I like to cut mine so that I like to put my pliers in so that it's in a line. You can do it like this as well. When you've got beads on, sometimes you find that this gets in the way. So I like to come down from the top and cut it with my tips and hold my wire. And that's what I have now. And you can see I've got a little end sticking out, and I'm going to take my pliers here and I'm going to tuck in my end. Okay, so there is my first wire wrapped loop. Some people do suggest leaving the tail on until you've done the second loop. So if you were putting beads on here, you leave the tail on, do your second wire wrap loop. And then if your beads aren't snugly fitting on the wire, what you can do is wrap that around again and wrap this one around again. Now personally, I find that just gets in the way. I kind of get caught up on it. So I don't do that myself, but then I've got some foolproof tips to getting my wrap spaced nicely, so maybe that's helpful. Now you'll notice that I wrapped it around with my fingers, holding the tail as I was wrapping it with my fingers. You can do that with your pliers as well. Let me show you that. So we'll make another one on this end. Notice also that I make a bend in the wire before I make my loop. And the reason I do that is because that gives me a nicely centered loop. So it's nicely centered on my wire. So instead of using your chain nose pliers to hold it, you can use your round nose pliers. And then you take this end, and if you want to, if you're using a thicker wire, this works well. But I find that I don't have as much control when I do it with my pliers. Getting the pliers back in there, I also find that my tail gets all wound up. So that's how you would do it with your pliers if you wanted to. And I would recommend doing that only if you are going to be using a thicker wire. How do I make the second loop and get it the same size? And this is a question I get asked all the time. Now, the important thing here is to remember to leave a gap for your wraps on top of your beads. So we take our pliers and we pop the chain nose pliers on top of the beads just like that, and we make a bend, make our second bend. And then we want to pop our round nose pliers in, and you do need to remember to leave that gap, otherwise you won't have anywhere to put your wraps. So that is a problem if you forget to do that. Now I'm going to wrap around, turn my wrist, bring it round, and remember to give it a good pull. I can already see that that is going to be slightly larger than the other side. So I'm actually going to go back and bring it down a little bit. And that's okay. Now I haven't got a bend in there, so just going to play with that to make it right. That's looking better. Now I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and I'm going to wrap around 3 times. And of course I need to cut off my tail, and I'm going to come in here and use the tips of my putters coming down from the top and cut. And then I need to tuck in my end. And to me this is the trickiest bit, is getting your end to go in, and I'll talk to you a bit more about my tips and tricks for that later. There we have our component with its 2 wire wrap loops. You do need to make sure that your loops are facing the same way. I've got one loop where you can see the circle and one loop where you can see the side of the loop. I don't want that. You always want your loops to be going both in the same direction. Now the other thing people talk about is that you want your wraps to be opposite. So if you hold your wire like this and you wrap around, and then you make your second one and wrap around, your wraps will automatically go in the opposite direction. I don't even know how people get them going in the same direction. People do say that if you make them this way, they don't kink so much. So I haven't really tested that theory because my wraps are always going in the opposite direction. Some people find it easier to hold their loop in their non-dominant hand while they're wrapping their wire around. So let's try that. It feels very odd to me to be doing it this way. So I guess this is how you could get them going different ways if you held your pliers in one hand one time and the other hand the other time. So this feels really very strange to me, but some people prefer this. Anyway, that's something that you can play with and decide which one works for you. You know, jewellery making can be a very lonely pursuit, and I have an amazing community called the Style Makers Network where we get to share our work, we get to discuss our problems. We also have monthly challenges, and I do blog posts over there as well. And you have daily access to me if things go wrong and you really need advice. So that's the Style Makers Network. I'll leave you a link below if you're interested in joining. How much tail should I leave? This is actually my secret weapon. I always used to cut my tail too short, and then I'd struggle to wrap the tail around. You want to leave a good tail, at least an inch and maybe more. Even though I've wrapped this, I have a really good tail still on there. I've got at least an inch there. As I said before, you can hold it with either your pliers or your finger to wrap it around, but you want to make sure that you leave yourself a long enough tail. So that's tip number 2, leave yourself a long enough tail so that you can easily wrap it around. How to open a wire wrap loop. It's really important to remember that you can't open your wire wrap loop once it's wrapped around. So if you're adding a charm or perhaps another component to it, you need to make sure that you add it before you do the wrapping. We're just going to pretend there's some beads on here, and I'm going to make a bend, and then I am going to take my pliers and my round nose pliers, wrap it around like that. So this is the lady with the scarf. We're going to add this component to it. So what I need to do is pop it on there, and you need to do this before you wrap it, and then you can generally make it fit through like that. If you can't get it through, now it's pretty easy with 24 gauge wire, but if you were using a 20, for example, you might have more difficulty. So what you can do is hold your loop on the side like this and just twist your hand down just a fraction. See, I'm only moving my hand just a fraction. So let me see if I can show you that from the side. See, I'm just moving it just a fraction. And that opens it up just enough that you can fit on a charm or something like that. And then what you do is take it on the side again and move your hand down. So I'll show you that from the side. If it's like that, just move it down. So you're only moving it just a fraction. And now you go in with your chain nose pliers, pushing your charm or whatever it is out of the way, and wrap it around. So that's how that works. Now obviously I made this component, remember this is the one that didn't hold, so I would not be using that because that wouldn't hold, but you get the idea. All is not lost if you forget. You can use a jump ring to attach your component, but make sure you are consistent. So tip number 3 is add your charm or other component before you wrap your loop. What happens when it goes wrong? Now let's talk about troubleshooting, because it's all very well to make your loops, and in the perfect world they would all be perfect, but let's face it, you're going to make some bad ones and you'll need to fix them. We all do. My loop is not round. It's quite common to pull your loop out of shape when you're wrapping the wire around. If it's the first part of the loop that isn't round, you can pull hard on the wire or the scarf to make it round. So for example, this loop here is not round and it's not sitting squarely or centered on the wire. So what I'm going to do is put my round nose pliers in, and I'm going to put them at the mark that I've made, and I'm going to pull nice and tight. Now my wire is too far up, so I'm going to just go like this, twist around and pull again, and I'm going to keep doing that until I get my loop looking right. So I am actually pulling quite hard on this tail here, so pull it really, really hard. And what that does is it makes the wire conform to the shape of the pliers. So there we go. Now my loop is round again, so I could go ahead and wrap that nicely. When you put your pliers in for the second part of the loop, fill the loop with your pliers. So I've got the first part of my loop done, and I put my pliers in, and if I actually pop that where the mark is, it doesn't fill up the gap. Ideally it will, but I've actually intentionally made this loop bigger. So if I was to wrap this, you can see there that my loop's getting all kind of wiggly and out of shape. So I'm actually going to push my pliers right up and fill that space. Now ideally I would have made my loop smaller, but I made it bigger so I could demo. So if you push your pliers kind of right up in there, it will fill the space and it will make your loops nice and round. It's not perfectly round, so if your loop isn't round, pop your pliers in and just give it a little wiggle. It will reshape your loop to being round again. I just recently had 100,000 subscribers and I'm so excited about that. And I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed. That doesn't mean you can stop subscribing if you aren't already. If you're enjoying my content and you would like to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also give me a thumbs up and a like. Now sometimes you are subscribed but you still don't see my content, so you might want to consider signing up for my newsletter as well. I'll leave that linked in the description box below. My wraps are messy. What if your wraps are really messy? There are several different solutions to this one. Before I show you a messy loop where my wires aren't close together, I want to show you a little trick for getting them close together. You'll see here I'm holding my loop in my pliers and I am holding it just where the wire crosses, and I've actually got it at a little angle. So if I was to put it on straight, it would be like that, but I'm actually holding it at a little angle, just slightly, not a lot, because otherwise you'll find it gets, if you hold it like this, you won't be able to wrap around here. So just a fraction of an angle. And what I want to do is pull this wire here straight back towards me and almost up towards or to the right. You can see there, if I take my pliers off, it's coming straight towards me. Now when I wrap around, I want to kind of pull down and notice that my wire is way over here, and bring it up. And I'm pulling it back so that it's in line with my pliers again. And round and back, and again round and back. And every time I bring it back, I'm bringing it back in line with my pliers. If your wraps are not close enough, like this one, you can push them together using either a pair of needle nose pliers. I like to use my Xuron crimping pliers for this, or you can just use your chain nose pliers. I find the smaller tips help me to get closer. Now I probably won't be able to do it with this one because it's made from 16 gauge wire, but I'm going to give it a try. Oh, there we go. So you can actually push them up together like this, and you can switch around to the other side and do the same thing. Now you can still see that I have a gap here. So what I'm going to do is stick my pliers inside my loop there and pull it up, and do the same from the other side. There we go. Done with 16 gauge wire. It's not a perfect wrapped loop, but you can see it worked really well. And I wanted to demonstrate with this thick wire so you could see what I was doing. So let's demo with the smaller wire as well. This is something that most people get wrong. And you see, I don't have a lady with the scarf. The wind's not blowing hard enough. If I was to wrap that around like that, you can see what's happening. My wraps aren't close together at all. Isn't that terrible? That's a really over-exaggeration. I'm going to use my Jewellery crimping pliers, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to squeeze my wraps together. And with them being so far apart, it might be a bit tricky, but let's try. I think I'm going to have to do it in small increments. Yep. I did it so badly that it's actually really hard to fix, but we'll get there. Okay, so we're getting closer. You can see there it's closer than it was, and we turn it over and just do it on both sides. Now my wraps are nice and close together, but they're too far away from my loop. Now I'm going to stick my pliers inside my loop like that, and I'm going to squeeze up. Now this will push my loop down and it will make it out of shape, but we know how to fix that because we can put our round nose pliers back in there. Sometimes you might need to take your chain nose pliers and recenter everything as well, just to make it a perfect loop. Now that was a terrible loop, right? That was something that no one would do, have their wraps that far apart. But I managed to rescue it, and it's now looking like a pretty perfect wrap loop to me. So even though it was a terrible loop, I did manage to make it right. So tip number 4 is to use either needle nose pliers or your Jewellery crimping pliers to squeeze your loops together. I damaged my wire when I wrap my loops. A lot of people tell me that they get plier marks or marring on their loops. And the reason for this is that you're using too much of an iron grip. I have the opposite problem where mine actually slip out of my pliers because I'm not squeezing hard enough. This is where your nylon jeweled pliers come in. If you're having trouble with marring your wire, switch to a pair of nylon jeweled pliers to hold your loop while you're wrapping the tail around. This way you won't damage the wire. Some people also dip their pliers into a product like Plasti-Dip so that the jaws of their pliers are softer and less likely to damage. You can also wrap a piece of masking tape around your pliers. I'm going to hold my loop in my jaws of my nylon jawed pliers, and I haven't got that scarf in the right place, so there we go, that's what I'm wanting. And so if you hold this in your nylon jawed pliers, it will not damage your wire. And I can still wrap it round quite nicely. I didn't quite get it right, so I'm just going to push it with my thumbnail, and there we go. And you can see mine is wobbling around in there a bit because I don't have an iron grip. But if you do, then holding it with your nylon jeweled pliers will actually help. So tip number 5 is use nylon jeweled pliers to hold your loop so you don't damage the wire. I can't control my wraps. The big thing I struggled with when I started was getting my wraps neat. And the reason I struggled with this was that I left my tail too short and there wasn't enough to hold on to. So when I'm making a wire wrapped loop, I like to leave at least 2 inches. I would rather waste a little bit of wire than have the problem of not having a long enough tail. So there we go. It's so easy to do it when you have a nice long tail. So you can see here, that gives me a good handle to hold on to. Now let's demo what happens if I don't have a long tail. So I put my bend in my wire and I'm going to make my wrap or my loop. And you can see there I have a really short tail. Now I can probably do it with this one and a 24 gauge wire, but I certainly couldn't do this with a thicker wire. So now you can see I don't really have very much to hang on to, so I have to push it around rather than pulling it. And now it's getting really tight. It's okay, and I can do it because I've had years of practice, but getting that last little wrap is quite a challenge, and I'm using my fingernail there to pull it around. So you can see I can still do it, but it's not a great idea. Tip number 6 is leave a long tail and use your hand to wrap. If you're interested in making the jewellery I'm wearing today, I'm wearing my chandelier earrings, and these are probably my favourite all-time earrings. I wear them almost, honestly, 2 or 3 times a week. So I will leave you a link for the tutorial for these. I'm also wearing some bracelets. This one I made when I did my ultimate knot for stretch bracelets tutorial. So I'll leave you that one linked below. This one is the Book Lovers Soft Flex Kit bracelet, and I think I did this one as a members only video in the Style Makers Network. And this one is another stretch bracelet that I made. It's just using some gemstones and some 3mm balls and a little silver bicone. If you're keen to make the t-shirt I'm wearing, I will leave you a link to a video all about how to make your own t-shirt and also how I embellished this t-shirt as well. I can't tuck in my ends. Just trim off the end and tuck it in. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, and I just couldn't do it. I can share what I've learned, and hopefully it will help you do what seems like a simple task. My best tip for tucking in your ends is to use either needle nose pliers, or I like to use my Xuron crimping pliers to tuck in my ends. I actually never use these pliers for crimping. I always use my magical crimper, but that's another story. I use these Xuron crimping pliers for all sorts of things though, including tucking in my ends, because they have super fine points and you can get right in there. I also like to use this divot here, and that kind of curves the wire around. I always find it's best to squeeze just the little tail, not the whole wrap, as you don't want to squash it. This also allows the tail to tuck in underneath your other wraps. You can see here I have a wire wrap loop, and you can see the tail poking out there. So the reason you need to tuck it in is so that it doesn't catch on clothes and doesn't poke anyone. So what I like to do is take my wire, and I like to squeeze it with that divot there. And I'm just squeezing the end of that little tail. And that's actually done it, it's pushed it in, but it's not quite far enough. Then I take the points and I just give it a little squeeze. Now notice I'm not squeezing everything. If I was to use my chain nose pliers, what would happen is that if I had beads here, I couldn't get in there. So that's why I like to use my Xuron crimping pliers. And sometimes it's useful, once you've squeezed it in, to give it a push up. And then you might need to squeeze it in again. And now, when I feel it, I can't feel that tail at all. It can also be helpful to wrap your wire a little further around and pull it back. It's kind of like muscle memory. Once your wire has been bent that way, it wants to go back there. So here I am, I've got my wire wrapped loop, and I've got my wire at the front. So I want to take it to the back, and I'm going to pull it all the way over here. And then I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to pull it a little bit more. Then I'm going to pull it undone. And what that does is it gives the wire that little bit of muscle memory. I know that's a ridiculous thing to say about wire, but it just kind of gives it that curve. Once you've cut that end off, what can happen is that it's easier to go back to where it wants to go. And I'm going to give it a squeeze up, just finishing it off nicely with the little tips there. And don't be scared to do it as many times as you need to until that little end is tucked nicely in. Another perfect wire wrap loop. So tip number 7 is to use Xuron crimping pliers or needle nose pliers to tuck in your ends. My loop isn't centered on the wire. Sometimes when you make the loop part, you will find that the loop is off center to the tail. This is an easy one to fix. You just pop it back into your round nose pliers and you pull back a bit, and then you pull your scarf up again. Here's my example of this one, and you can see there that the stem of the wire is here and the loop is not in the right place. It's kind of off-centered. So this is nice and easy to fix. You just pop your pliers back in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm holding the stem of the wire, and obviously if you had beads on, you'd be holding the beads. I'm just going to pull back a bit. Then I'm going to kind of adjust my round nose pliers into the right place, and I'm going to pull nice and hard on that tail or the scarf until I get it in the right place. And it's come open, so I can squeeze it shut. Now it's perfect and ready for its wraps. So that's a really easy one to fix. My loops aren't consistent. If your design requires a lot of wire wrap loop components, it's a good idea to make them all at once. That way you will be more consistent. Here's where marking your chain nose pliers as well as your round nose pliers comes in handy. Do your first loop and then measure how much space the wraps take on your pliers. and then mark them so that you can use that mark to make every other bend. Here's a component that I've made the first wire wrap loop, and you can see I've used 3 wraps and it's looking pretty good. Now I need to make a wire wrap loop on this end. So what I can do is pop my chain nose pliers in here and decide how much space I need for my wraps. So it's about there. So if I take my pen and I make a mark where the wire is, and now you can see I've got a little mark on my pliers and it's quite close to the tip. So now when I pop my pliers onto the wire at this end, if I line the wire up with that mark, then I should get the same space. So I'm making my bend. You can check it, look at it like this and go, yeah, that's about the right size. Pin my round nose pliers and make my loop. And we've got 1, 2, 3 wraps. There we go. There is my wire wrap loops, and you can see that it filled the space perfectly. Tip number 9 is mark your pliers. How many wraps should I do? As a general rule, do 3 wraps when using a 24 gauge wire and 2 wraps if your wire is thicker. My beads are loose on my wire. If your beads are moving around on your wire and not sitting snugly, you can do another wrap to tighten it up. And this is where leaving your first tail uncut until you've finished your second wrap can come in handy. When I made this one, I left too much of a gap, and you can see that there is a little bit of a gap between my beads here. So I could have actually wrapped this again. But if I have a look at this, there's no way if I do 1 wrap that is going to fill that space. It's actually going to need probably 2. Now I could re-wrap it, and if I had left my tail on this end, I could have wrapped it again. But I've actually only done 2 wraps on this side, so doing 4 on this side would make it feel really uneven. So I would actually undo this one and I would do it again. Once again, this would be better avoided rather than fixed, simply by marking your pliers and making sure that your bend is a consistent space from the top of your beads. I suck at this. This is probably the one thing I hear the most. I can't do it. I've tried and I just can't get it right. My loops are messy and there's not enough space to wrap, or too much space, and my beads are moving around. Remember that Rome wasn't built in a day, and you won't become a master jewellery maker in a day either. Practice, practice, practice. You're not allowed to say you suck until you've made at least 50, and if you still suck, then another 50. You will get there. So tip number 10 is practice like your life depends on it. So there you go. There are my 10 tips for making your best wire wrap loops and to fix the ones that just don't go right, because we all have them. I still have. You know, there are days where you do all your best things and the wire wraps are too far apart, or maybe my loop isn't quite round, or it's off center. And you saw some of that as I was going through. So don't beat yourself up. Learn how to fix the ones that don't go right, and it will change everything. I hope you found this episode useful and it will help you to make more beautiful wire wrap loops. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again soon.